Welcome to Automates, the podcast that brings you musings from thought leaders and industry pioneers who are shaping the way we work, think, and succeed. Each episode is packed with insights, expert interviews, and practical tips that will inspire and empower you to take your business to the next level. So tune in, subscribe, and get ready to innovate with Automates. Good morning, Tess. Hello, how are you?
Morning. Very well, thanks. How are you?
Yeah, not too bad. Not too bad. It's the day, the sun is shining almost here on the Isle of Wight. Don't know what it's doing where you are, but it's looking like a good day.
Grim.
Grim? Oh. Okay, it's a nice day for me, so that's the most important thing.
I'm happy for you.
Welcome to Automates. Thank you very much for taking the time to sort of share your story and talk to us today about all things legal tech. I was trying to, in my prep for this, I was trying to take a step back and remember the year that I first met you, and I couldn't pin it down. But I know that you were at Clifford Chance and I was at Hike. So I'm not going to spoil anything else for any of our audience. So why don't you introduce yourself? Let us know where you're working now, what you're doing, and a little bit of background, and then we'll dive into some topics.
Sure. So I think we met in 2013 because that was when I moved into knowledge systems at Clifford Chance. So I was a transactional PA and I moved into knowledge systems to bring that kind of the transactional side into an IT team. So that, how do lawyers work? What do they do? So I worked at CC in that team for about 6 or 7 years, I think. But I'm currently in Charles Russell Speechlys. I'm the head of legal technology here. And that team is about 3 years old now. We used to, again, sit in knowledge, but we're going through an amazing, exciting change at the moment. We've just had the arrival, or not really just, maybe 9 months ago now, the arrival of Joe Cohen, who's come to set up a new department called Advanced Client Solutions. So he's the director of that department, and legal tech has moved underneath Joe's department, and we're recruiting legal project managers and software developers and really expanding that offering to our clients around alternative delivery of legal services so that lawyers can be lawyers and other experts do the other parts of the job.
Ah, nice. That's cool. I mean, I think that, so 2013, I'm trying to think. So HiQ, you were looking after, was it Collaborate or Publisher at that time?
Both. Yeah, both.
Okay,
I was working with Angie on Publisher and then looking after Collaborate with Guggen.
Nice.
It's just me and Guggen against the world.
So I think sort of back in those days, I think that idea that transitioning, sort of as you described it, somebody who'd been sat in the business trying to sort of support lawyers, do what lawyers do best, and then bringing that into a knowledge context. I think that's it's a really interesting sort of transition. And I don't know, do you reckon sort of Clifford Chance were one of the first kind of organizations, obviously from their scale and their sort of the opportunity wise, do you think that was fairly unique back then? Or do you think that sort of, and were you sort of uniquely positioned to then sort of start to learn not just about HiQ, but all of the other, the technologies that have come since then? You know what I mean? There's a whole bunch of stuff that contributes to what people do.
Yeah, I think so. I think what this role is like and what it's established itself as is this sort of conduit between technology and legal operations. And I couldn't practice law, but I understand bits of the law, and I did a bit of contract law at college. And as a PA, obviously, you pick up, even if you haven't studied any law, you pick up what your fee earners are doing that you work for on your allocation. And then in IT, I've got some technical background. My dad's a developer, so I sort of speak IT language, but I couldn't be a developer unless I was taught separately how to do development language. But it's being that sort of, is to describe it as like a UN peace negotiator, but it's that sort of hybrid person in the middle who knows enough about both things to be able to be the glue between and work out, what might be the best solution, and also about decision making, things like, we should move away from this system because XYZ from an IT perspective is all very well, but not if that system is being fully relied upon by one particular practice group. to do an essential task, and perhaps a task that's regulated that they have to do it. And so it's like, well, we're not an IT company, we're a law firm. So how are you proposing that they do their job now if you take that piece away? So being that conduit between those teams, I think is really key. And it was something knowledge systems always did, because knowledge is what we sell. So, having a robust system where people can search for templates and precedents and look for the tools to do their job. And then it's now expanded into the actual tools to deliver their job, because things aren't delivered on paper anymore so much. And we've seen lots of leaps from, VDRs to e-signatures and now to generative AI. It's just people's lives are different. So you've got to provide different tools for them to do their jobs.
Yeah. I just think buzzword bingo, 5 minutes in, we've said generative AI. I mean, I've got a little slip here that's sort of for my podcast. At what point do I either say it or does the guest say it? So 5 minutes in, I think
I've got to get it out there early.
I mean, it's not as early as some, so it's fine. It's not that bad. I think what's really interesting before we start talking about the tech itself and some other topics, I think that whole area of knowledge systems, the value it brings to an organization like a law firm is really key. And I think there was a period of time where knowledge wasn't really an area of focus for many firms. It was, and the departments existed, but it was almost as if it was a combination of the old school library plus some new sort of technologies around document automation. But the evolution of knowledge and the importance of knowledge has come full circle. So I remember doing a presentation in 2012, 2013 when I worked for IQ to a group of lawyers, talking about the potential of knowledge as a function to be revenue generating, to be efficiency operationally, and various other bits and pieces, the whole breadth of stuff. And it sort of went quiet. And now I think probably in the last 2 or 3 years, maybe since COVID, I'm not quite sure, knowledge has become really strategic again. And it partly to do with generative AI, but I think it's become really strategic and really fundamental to a lot of what law firms are doing. But I think the really interesting thing is that how traditional knowledge departments are being not necessarily merged, but sort of much more technically focused and therefore much more technology or IT aligned. And I guess that's probably what's happened to you and your team within sort of CRS in terms of that evolution. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, I'd say so. I mean, I think you have to move with the times, don't you? Whatever your job is, you've got to adapt. And if you don't adapt, you die. And it's not on an individual basis and on an organisational basis. If we don't adapt to what clients need, then we won't get the work anymore. And if the people delivering the work don't adapt to the most efficient way of doing it, or the most risk adverse way of doing it, or the sort of, the value adds that you can get out of technology, then we won't win the work and we won't be able to deliver it at a profit. So it's definitely something that, every job has to change. It has to evolve with the world. You couldn't continue to deliver, hotel management services by using a book to write down who's in what room. It's just not feasible. I mean, that's my old life in the hotel industry. But, genuinely, my first job when I was 16 was working in a hotel with 20 bedrooms, sorry. And there was a book and there was a diary, and every line was a different room, and you wrote down who was booked into that room. And that's just not scalable, and it's not feasible in this century. But knowledge, I think, is really well placed to deliver these sorts of changes, and which is why I think it was a natural place for legal tech to sit initially. What's great about what Charles Russell Speechlys is doing is that it's invested money and focus in Joe building out this new department, so that we're not a part of something that was already existing, but we are a thing in itself. And that whole client focus, client facing, revenue generating strategy is really at the forefront now. But knowledge has a lot to be respected for and to be thanked for in terms of starting this evolution, because particularly in disputes, all the e-discovery stuff that came out of knowledge teams. Things to do with document automation came out of knowledge teams because they owned the content in the first place. And with all the stuff that I've delivered in the last sort of decade, in terms of efficiency drives or value add for clients or reducing risk, it's all about the content and the technology and the person who does it and the process. So you can't just shoehorn a piece of technology into something and make an improvement. You've got to adapt a process around it and make sure the right person's doing it and that we've got quality content underpinning it. Otherwise, you can't automate nothing. You've got to have that knowledge in the first place. Yeah. So it's really key that we keep working with knowledge even now, and we do. We've got these great relationships. But interestingly, going back to the generative AI point, and that's sort of what we used to think of knowledge as this sort of dusty library with a librarian that knew where everything was, and you'd go in and you'd ask a question, they'd give you the thing that you needed. Obviously, that has evolved into online subscription content, and all law firms subscribe to the standards, Lexis, Westlaw, PLC. And now that's coming full circle again, because if you're, in the old days, you'd be taught to do Boolean searching. Well, that's not the way that you are accessing content anymore, because with generative AI, it's all about prompting. And we were discussing this the other day, that Jazz Breslin, who's the head of research and information services here at the firm, she and her team are experts in searching. So they're the perfect team to then leverage and pivot into becoming the experts in writing prompts, because that's their skill set. So we've all got a set of skills that can be pivoted. It's all about being open to doing that and not sort of thinking, well, this is my job and I'm not changing, because that's just not workable in the 21st century, and everything moves a lot quicker in this century as well.
Yeah, well, 100%. I mean, you look at sort of, I always look at the old adage. I mean, this little device here, it's got more processing power than our desktop PCs that we had 15 years ago inside of the law firms we were working in. It's that kind of bonkers kind of progression. I think that whole consumerization of technology, the expectations of younger lawyers not having to go through 5 days of training just so that they can use a word style or whatever it might be. 5 days is an exaggeration, but you know what I mean.
No, absolutely. My dad was an IT director at Habitat in the 80s and built out a sort of point of sale system that would tell the warehouse what to deliver for the next day and all that kind of thing. And it was all, bespoke built, and they had to have developers on site and everything. And that computer took up a room, probably the size of the room I'm in now, if not a bit bigger. And it had a megabyte of processing power. Yes. And it's just like, or I think that's what he said it was, but it's just mad. Like my phone is more powerful than the thing that used to run Habitat.
Yeah, well, exactly. And look where it got Habitat. I mean, I'm joking.
Yeah, well, but it's after my dad left, obviously it all went downhill.
But I think that one constant is change, and change in technology, change in working practices. I think that's an area that, again, coming back to knowledge, but that whole understanding of the dynamic of the impact of layering yet another technology on a lawyer to get their legal work done. What does that mean? What's the context shift cost of going from one technology to another? How do you leverage it? What do you do? You mentioned it in one of the things you just said, which is one of the key pillars is like process, understanding what the process is, understanding what the process could be, and going on that journey. And I think that's our bread and butter. So I'll talk about process until the cows come home. But ultimately, a lot of firms there's a lot of hard yards to be done in process and understanding what the ideal scenario is and when to approach that and when to do that. And those hard yards are often sort of superseded by the fact that it's all right, we've got a piece of tech, we can just use that, and that's the process. But it's almost like that's a bit of a shortcut and a little bit short-sighted. Now, I'm not saying that's there aren't technologies out there that can do that, but I think one of the things that will evolve, and I'd be keen to hear your thoughts around the whole Gen AI thing, prompting, prompt libraries, using experts to the experts who are in right things to craft and curate things for other people, but understanding what that whole sort of change looks like, and what we're expecting of our lawyers, what we're expecting of our sort of support people and teams that are supporting the lawyers in terms of technology adoption and how quickly it's changing. Because it's always changing, and you catch up, and then the day that you've caught up, you're already behind again. And as a firm, that process is really challenging. We're the same as a vendor. We have a roadmap. We deliver the roadmap, but our roadmap the product is already behind our roadmap, because the roadmap is a constantly forward-looking kind of experience. How are you setting up sort of your new team to sort of overcome some of those challenges? You mentioned the firms invested in a new team, new personnel, new everything really. How much is the change management and the adoption of technologies a core part of what you're doing?
Yeah, it's absolutely huge. The culture shift has to be towards being okay with change, because historically, so I mean, 11 years ago when we first met, we were doing a replacement intranet at Clifford Chance, and in those days, those projects had a scoping of like a year, and then a build of a year, and 6 months testing, and then roll out. And it's by the time you've actually rolled something out, it's like you say, it's over. And then because technology is changing so quickly, it's even more of a panic timeline now, and it's you can't. But the culture problem with that was that they wanted perfection from day one. Yeah. So you couldn't roll anything out unless it was exactly what they'd asked for. And it's getting people to understand that you will get there, we'll get the things that you want, but you've got to start using the thing that's available, because otherwise you're going to fall behind with the market, you're going to fall behind with your competitors, you're not going to be delivering client excellence or efficiency. You've got to use something. So I always try and find analogies in like real life for things like, okay, maybe you can't cook a roast today, but you can still use the oven. It's like you've got to think about where you're going to have some gains. And I think there's a real battle in legal, because lawyers are, and this is a good thing, naturally risk adverse, because that's their job. And so when you say to them, I can do this for you, but it won't be exactly the way that used to be, but, it'll be like this. And then, there's obviously going to be a sense of panic to start with, that this isn't what they think it needs to be, and that we should probably wait until it's right, or till it's perfect. I've been told many times. So getting that shift in terms of people accepting iterative change, and feedback and agile development, so that if I only have to build something small for you, you can tell me what's wrong with it and I can fix it quickly, and we can get there probably in the same time frame. But on the journey, you're using this technology and you're already getting benefit from it, and the feedback you're giving me is timely and not 3 years old. So it's that piece is really, really tricky, and I think it needs top-down support, which we have. Simon Ridpath and Leslie O'Leary have completely backed this whole strategy. The partners are on board. It takes time and it takes effort to make change. So you've got to have people behind you. Otherwise, you're just sort of barking into the void to try and get people to do things. And often it's like there's a lot of hand-holding involved. So our sort of offering as a team is, here's some self-service things that you can do for yourself. Here's some templates you can use. Here's some template sites you can use. Here's some tools you can legal project manage your own smaller matters with. And then the second stage is you've got a really weird, sort of slightly off the bat new matter that doesn't really fit with things that you've done before, and you're not really sure what could be helpful. So we offer sort of consultancy. And then you've got this full-on legal project manager, legal technologist supporting your DSAR or your discovery or your transaction, your big matter that you're doing. And then, of course, we've got to think of our strategic clients and the people that we want to provide a consistent service to, whatever they're instructing us on. So who are those clients? who is their point of contact from a legal project management perspective? If they've got a technology question, who is their contact that they can go to? They don't need to ask a lawyer for that. They shouldn't need to be coming to a lawyer and saying, oh, by the way, I'm using a HiQ site, or I'm accessing my reporting on the Autologic system, and I don't know what I'm looking at. That's what our other experts are for. So I think that sort of recognition and investment in business services expertise is also part of the key to it, that it's not sort of a support service, but it's another form of expertise and consultancy that this law firm offers in terms of how we deliver the client service and the client matters.
Yeah, and I think it's one of those things. You look at how, I remember sort of 2011 when I first started at HiQ. Before that, I was at CMS. The idea that there was a client solutions team sat within IT or sat within a function within the business, the concept didn't exist. The idea that I think I went to 2 pitches for winning new work with a couple of partners and somebody from marketing, just as I was leaving CMS, so back in the summer of 2011 sort of thing. But that was not normal. And I think that transition to understanding that sort of the pressures that law firms are under, economic pressures that are under, is because of is one of the factors, is the voice of the customer. The customer, is the old adage, is always right, but ultimately customer expectations and experiences and delivery is really important to factor into what you're doing, not just having a service, but how do you bespoke it? How do you personalize it? How do you make it valuable? How do you make it sticky? How can you generate revenue from something that traditionally was delivered by a human? Is there technology that can allow you to do that? I think they're the things that I think that are driving your kind of teams forward. The reasons why your teams exist is that new way of sort of thinking about that client experience, ultimately looking at revenue and understanding where that revenue can come from and what that looks like. But I think it's really interesting to sort of take that idea of constant change, because we were talking just now about how you've got to educate lawyers to feel comfortable amongst change, during change. But as a team, that change is constant for you even more so. So I think it's that kind of, we often talk, and I've in a couple of episodes ago on the podcast, but for years, we talk about the impact of technology on lawyers' activity, work, etc., what that means. But ultimately, you're change agents, but you're under constant change yourself. How do you cope with that in terms of, oh, there's a new thing to run after, or there's a new thing, or we need to pivot to focus on this? I'm sure Joe's got a whole strategy, and I'd love to chat to Joe at some point around what that looks like. But how do you manage that change internally to then articulate that change so the lawyers don't see the lawyers see the swan gliding gracefully across the water. They don't see the feet going like 1,000,000 miles an hour. How do you juggle that? What does that look like for you guys, you and your team?
Well, I mean, you have to be on the ball all the time, obviously, with that kind of thought leadership piece, seeing what's on the market. But also, I mean, I'm a bit of a skeptic, so I'm always like, well, what is that really going to be beneficial? So there's part of me that obviously I've got to be innovative, I've got to be looking to the future and looking at new things. But I'm very kind of pragmatically asking, what is the problem we're trying to solve?
Yeah.
So what does the client want? What is the objective? What's the task you're trying to achieve? What's the problem with the way you're doing it now? Then we can look at what might solve it, rather than just someone sort of panicking and saying, this isn't working, let's use generative AI, because they don't really know what they're fixing. And if you don't know what you're fixing, you don't know what the solution is. So it's a lot of it is about sort of being able to manage people's expectations around what technology can do and pull it back to A, what's the problem? And B, why are we doing this? Because it might be that we shouldn't be doing it in the first place. Like, are we doing a task that actually we started doing 15 years ago and is absolutely not necessary anymore? Are we sending the client a report every month that they're not even reading? Why are they not reading it? Is it because the information's out of date and it needs to be more timely if they're to be interested in it? Is it because the information isn't displayed in a way that is accessible to them, or doesn't even include the things that they want it to include? Rather than sort of putting sticky tape over an existing process or solution or offering, coming back to the what's it for me is always key. And unfortunately, of course, what that brings is often a lot more conversation. And so sometimes you do just have to pivot quickly and add a bit of technology or change a process or delegate something to a different team. But as a strategic thing, what we should be always doing is looking at the why are we doing it in the first place on an ongoing basis. So it's about being planners and not waiting for the lawyer to come to you with the problem, but actually thinking, oh yeah, how do we do that kind of matter now? And what's changed since we started doing it? And so yeah, having the right expertise is absolutely key to that. So I've done some process improvement work in my role. I did Six Sigma when I was at my last firm. But actually we've just recruited a process improvement manager to my team because where my team is now expert in different systems and they're able to do training and they're looking at roadmap with vendors and they're looking at requirements from the fee earners and the knowledge team about what they want the system to do and leveraging all of that. As these things change, like you say, things are changing all the time. Process has to adapt around it. So having an expert in process management is exactly what we need, because what Andrea is going to be doing is looking at an end-to-end process of a matter and looking for those pain points or the bits that, she can identify. Perhaps someone else doing a task that is currently sitting with someone that's just not really appropriate. It might be something really more administratively skilled person would do rather than a partner, or something that actually a lawyer should be doing because the way it's being done, they're checking it anyway. So maybe they should just do it in the first place. And I think that kind of thing is so key, because then what it identifies is quite often things that are happening across matters, whatever the discipline, and where people work in their teams and in their silos. Obviously, we could be repeating the same problems, or someone might have a great way of doing it and that hasn't transferred across in terms of as a firm. And one of our pieces of focus in our strategy is about being a more connected global network, being able to build up our sort of global offices as well, but to be able to deliver the same client service and matter type in every office, in every kind of part of the world, or across different practice groups. A client that instructs us on various different types of matter should not have a different experience depending on which department they're dealing with. We are one firm. And I mean, they don't. I'm not, there's not like problems, but actually, just having that consistency saves time as well. It means that they know what they're going to get. They know what questions to ask. And we have a consistent way of responding to them, or of delivering that piece of work, whoever's doing it, which just, it saves everybody time. Why reinvent the wheel when someone's already got one? You need to be learning from each other. And it's so easy, I think, in specialisms to get sort of focused on what you do. And that is their job. That's the other point, is that it's not the lawyer's job to find efficiencies. It's not a real estate lawyer's job to go, oh, corporate could use this. That's our job. That's the whole point of having us as a team. So this is where we become that glue in between. And it's going to be really exciting to see what Andrea identifies in these first few months. And I'm sure, we'll be able to identify things that people with her skill set can do and probably scale that operation. I mean, I know in other firms it's already really well embedded, and it is ongoing. It's not something that you go, oh, we fixed the processes now, we don't need them anymore. It's a constant process.
And I think so. We sort of see this from all of our clients. Different clients have got different ways of approaching it. Law firms, insurance brokers, recruitment agencies, you name it. They've got different ways of looking at their business and understanding what it is. I was chatting to somebody a couple of weeks ago who isn't a client, and they're saying, "Oh yeah, we're doing a lot of work identifying and mapping out our processes." And I said, "Oh, that's great," but they're literally just mapping out their processes. they're not then doing something with that. They're creating a catalog of processes, almost like from an information security or a business continuity perspective.
Yeah.
They're not those things, but it's like, this is the process that Bob follows for this. And they open up Visio and they see it and they see the decision. And I'm like, I was sort of saying, okay, but that's great as a point in time. But to your point, processes need to be changed. They need to evolve. They need to iterate, but they also need to be alive. I think one of the things, and this is blatantly a plug for Autologics, so apologies, I don't normally do this. But one of the things that we're finding is that people who understand what our platform does, they start to take a step back and go, okay, well, we probably bought Autologics for an end-to-end process to solve our thing. And they probably have a second thing in the wings that's identified that is another practice area or is another sort of fundamental large-scale end-to-end process service that they want to deliver. But really interestingly, we've got 2 clients at the moment that are going through and doing exactly what you just said, which is identifying processes that are common across the business, regardless of practice area, business unit, division. But actually, how do we as a business do this? And how can we integrate this piece of technology to create standards for this? But then if we need to iterate it, we can just change it once, but it changes it for the business. It changes. So things like second pair of eye checks and approval workflows and things like that, they're operational. They're not specific to a transaction or to a process, not process, but specific to a business area. But they are a standardized way of doing a thing in an organization. And they're building out catalogs of these things that are being embedded inside of other end-to-end processes. And I think that's really interesting because for us, it's that evolution of where we thought our technology would be useful. Our technology would always be big end-to-end gnarly contract remediation or this use case that you guys are using it for. But ultimately, now people are thinking, okay, well, we've got this piece of technology. How can we standardize this thing? And it impacts all areas of the business or all client-facing areas of the business or whatever it might be. I think bringing those is alive.
And it comes back to what you were saying in the first bit, where with this sort of idea of just documenting your processes, because I'm such a nerd, I'm just imagining these beautiful pictures that you'd look through like a catalogue.
Yeah.
But I mean, that is the first step, because what the problem is there, the business problem you're trying to solve is only one person knows how to do this. What if they're not here? Yeah. What if they're on holiday? What if they're sick? What if they leave the firm? So documenting what you do obviously is a risk process that needs to happen. And that is where our project started. You know, we've got a paralegal who's super experienced and does is across this system that we use internally that was bespoke built for a particular client, now is used across other clients as well. And the fear, of course, is that at some point she's going to want to retire and nobody else really knows enough about that system to do anything with it. Plus, it was unsupported by the previous vendor. So the original project that I was given was, can you rebuild this so that we can support it long term? And you need to know about it as well, so that, you know, somebody else knows about it.
Yeah.
But of course, that's doing like for like. So that's a bit like, let's map out the process so we've got a copy of it. And what we ended up doing, obviously, was looking at loads of different developers that could develop something bespoke again. But it was screaming, this is not scalable, this is not future-proofed, and it's not better. Why are we changing it if it's not better? Why don't I just learn to use the current system? And one of the complaints from the team was that they couldn't change anything on the current system. So what we needed was something that we had the keys to make changes if we needed to, but also that was with a live vendor who was constantly amending their well done for breathing, Ben. But yeah, constantly amending your roadmap, taking feedback on what more other features would be useful in order to develop the tool. And the tool is quite specific and bespoke. It's not particularly unique. I'm sure that there are other firms that have similar types of systems. It's kind of a case management system, but it's specific to this group. But what was glaringly obvious was that actually once you got the data into this new system, there was so much more that could be done with it in terms of automating processes. So it needed to be going into a system where that automation was possible and adaptable at a quick speed, because at the moment, we're in a situation where we can't change anything anyway. But even if we could, even if we were still paying that original vendor from years and years and years ago, the way that they'd built the infrastructure, the architecture of that existing system wasn't something that could be adapted quickly. So again, you're looking at these huge, long projects by which time the requirements have changed, and something really simple like we just want another column in the report, or we want to be able to create a report that only uses this client. That really shouldn't be so complicated, and you shouldn't need to be coding things like that. That should be something that the super users, this is why we have secretaries with great technical skills. They should be able to suss that stuff out themselves with a low code platform. So it was an absolute no-brainer that we needed to be looking for something that had that kind of roadmap and that had that kind of scalability.
Yeah, that makes sense. Thank you. As I said, I don't normally do that kind of stuff on this podcast. This is normal other stuff, but it's sort of the whole process thing got me thinking. I think so. If we take a step back to then take a step forward, I think if we look at the pace of change in the last 18 to 24 months, for most organizations, not just law firms, when you're looking at sort of AI and all of this, the crazy stuff that's sort of out there, how do you see CRS sort of adapting to that? Now, I know you've set up a team, and that team is sort of specific, and Joe's got a great background with generative AI from previous firms, etc. How do you see sort of the future of your team evolving? You sort of thinking about the different teams. You've got legal project management, you've got process engineering, you've got technologists and all that sort of stuff. How do you see it sort of evolving? Do you think it's going to get easier anytime soon?
What, my day-to-day job?
Yeah. I mean, maybe not, but your team's sort of, because I think I look at it and I go, I think it's only going to get, the hype is only not just around generative AI, but around technology in general. You look at some of the investments recently, not just in Gen AI technology, but within legal tech specifically. And there's money coming into the vendors, which means that it's not going to stop. There is a constant wave of change happening. For a buyer of legal technology, and you said always being innovative, always horizon scanning. How do you see your team sort of evolving to adapt to that pace of change? Because it's only going to get faster.
Yeah, it's really tricky because a lot of it is about gut instinct, which I think Joe has a strong lot of. I think, you've got, when you see something coming out, you think, oh, is that the one? Or do we wait a little bit and wait and see what other vendors do? Because of course what happens is one vendor releases something and then 3 months later, a couple more come along, and 6 months later, there's 75 of them.
Yeah.
And you don't really want to be experimenting in terms of, obviously, every vendor we work with has to go through a security check because of the kind of information we're dealing with and all of the kind of information security requirements that we have for anything that we buy. And those things are more challenging when it's a smaller vendor. So you sort of, part of you wants the innovation coming from all these small vendors, but also part of you just wants like Litera and Thomson Reuters and Microsoft to just buy everything, because then you know that it's going to meet the requirements, because that's a simple procurement process. But you just I guess again it just comes back to, what do the clients want? What do the clients actually want us to be delivering, and not to get distracted by the shiny stuff that isn't relevant to you. I think generative AI is a different beast, though, because I think generative AI will be relevant to every part of the business. It's not just about providing the legal services. Like I say, the research and information services team are clearly going to have a huge part to play in any generative AI strategy, because they are the information people. They're their best place to kind of help with training and establishing best practice around using these kind of tools. But I mean, it's going to affect HR. It's going to affect the business development team. It's going to be everywhere. It's not just like when machine learning came out, the old school AI in like 2016, when we first started using Kira at my old firm. It's, that was very much a kind of, this is being used to deliver an M&A document review. It didn't really have anything to do with anybody else, unless, of course, if you were merging with another company and the HR team wanted to do an employment review in the same way you would for a client. But generative is a totally different beast. And so obviously we're on it and we want to keep track of that kind of thing. But I think with other things that are new, specific tools, I mean, even just something like, document automation, there are loads of different tools that do that now. Most firms have got Contract Express. It was the OG. It's the one that sort of is embedded in everyone's day-to-day now. And it is complex for some things that you just think, oh, it's not worth doing it because it's too complicated. So there's definitely a space in the market for a simpler automation tool for documents, or for Contract Express to obviously adapt their own roadmap. But it doesn't mean that we need to test every single one of them as soon as they're launched, because maybe we don't actually have the workload yet to automate. So the first thing you've got to do is identify, have we even got templates that are regularly used but haven't been automated because they're a bit too simple to automate with Contract Express? Is there a business case for even looking at these tools? Yeah, go to the demo or go to look at the stall and get their free book at the BLT conference. But I think, it doesn't mean we've got to run a pilot of every single tool. So it's about having a focus area and knowing who your engaged stakeholders are. Shoving something into someone's day-to-day when they don't want it is a lot of work. So you only want to do that if it's absolutely necessary from like a regulatory perspective, or because there is a strategic decision that the firm is going to change and we're all going to use this system instead. That is worth putting the time and energy into. If they're not interested and they're not engaged, then it's better to focus your time and energy, I think, on the people who are engaged and do want change, and use them then as champions to show what it can be like if you're open to innovation and if you're open to those conversations. And I think we can change the culture in different ways anyway. I mean, a bit of peer pressure is always good. Like if their counterparts at another firm are using something, that always helps. If their counterparts in a different department are using something and they want to sort of keep up, lawyers love a bit of competition. So pitting them against each other is my usual method for getting them to pay attention to something that I think is going to bring value to them. But the other thing that we're doing from a culture change perspective is getting the trainees involved. So embedding, so innovation isn't a department, it's a mindset. So we need everybody to be thinking about it in their day-to-day job and thinking, there must be a better way to do this. I'll ring the LPM team or I'll ring the legal technology team. So the trainees now at Charles Russell Speechlys all have to do an innovation project in every seat. So we've just started this and it's been really fascinating, like watching the enthusiasm of some of these, young lawyers who are coming into a new department. They don't really know how everything's done yet. So they're picking it up and also wondering why we're doing something in a certain way. Some of them have been apprentices already, so they've already got a little bit of background knowledge anyway. But there's some real low-hanging fruit, obviously, because there always is. It doesn't matter how much time and energy you've put into process improvement and legal technology adoption. There's always something that's been missed that can be picked up. And then there's some really, off-the-wall, thinking outside the box, all those metaphors, really innovative ideas coming from these young people that haven't worked in this sort of space.
Broken down by years of just
haven't got the jaded idea that you just can't change anything. But
grey hair in the bags like me.
Exactly. But actually that is something we're teaching them, is it's okay to fail. That's the other thing. Yeah. It's like, this is about learning. It's a bit like primary school is learning to learn. This is about learning to be innovative. So it's fine to come up with an idea and to do all the background checks and look into the requirements and sort of scope out what it is we're trying to achieve, and then realize that actually it wouldn't be worth putting a piece of technology into that process because it's over engineering the process and it's going to take longer, or it's going to save half an hour, but we only do it 7 times a year and it costs 20 grand. That's not worth it. They also need to see those examples for them to know when not to innovate or when not to change. Because otherwise it just always feels like change will be positive, and it isn't always the best thing to do, to change an existing process. And it might be that actually a change is on the horizon, but in order for it to be really embedded and to really work, you actually need a different person. Like, you need a different person to come and do that job. But a good example of that would be something like e-discovery and DSARs. We were, immediately you sort of got to react to this change in legislation that, people can request to be forgotten, and you've got to run this DSAR process if somebody comes to you. And we are doing this for our own firm, but also for our clients' firms. And so you've got to then have a way of being able to deliver that process. And there's a time limit. So it's not like, oh, well, we'll work it out as we go along. You've got a month. So you've got to be able to do this quickly. And you look at the way you're doing it manually, it's just not really going to work. So you think, okay, what piece of technology could we bring in to help with that? And Charlie in my team has worked really closely with Simon Heatley, the knowledge lead in LDR, in working out that process. But ultimately, you also need someone to do the process. And is it the right space for a lawyer to be doing that? Is it the right space for the technologist to be doing that? Or do we actually need someone to do that? Is the change of the process and the introduction of the technology also coming along with it the need to hire a headcount to do that job? Because you can't just keep loading more stuff onto other people's day to day. With this is a completely new piece of work. So maybe we don't hire a lawyer, but we hire someone to do those. And so it's all about kind of checking in on that all the time and making sure that whatever the change is, it's not having a knock-on impact that is potentially making something else worse, or even just creating a really unhealthy working environment. I mean, part of the strategy is also about, partly on the technology side, the user experience. Like, is this an easy tool to use? Can they get to know the technology quickly? Is it scalable? Can we bring people on board without doing intensive training? But also, what's the quality of someone's work life like? And are they doing the job that they trained to do? Or have they ended up being a project manager when they wanted to be a lawyer? Or have they ended up sort of, deep in this piece of technology that they really don't want to have to know so much detail about, because we haven't been able to provide them with an alternative resource? And that again comes back to Joe Cohen's strategy around alternative delivery. When do we need paralegals instead of lawyers? When do we need technologists or legal project managers? Or elevating secretaries to doing tasks that we didn't exist when I was a secretary, because all of these things have changed. Like, you're not doing typing anymore. You're not doing copy typing and audio typing, because you can scan things and OCR them and edit them quickly. And lawyers are typing for themselves because it's quicker than writing something out manuscript. It's not like the old days when I worked for Blethen Phillips and he would manuscript write with a fountain pen while on a plane and then arrive with a wad of paper at my desk. That you're working with a different skill set now. So that means that the support staff need to have different skill sets.
Yeah. That was definitely something that I saw starting even as early as sort of when I was at CMS, so 2010, that sort of time frame, where we were looking at the introduction of speech to text, doing voice recognition. So not giving sort of trainees a dictation machine, but giving them the ability to do speech to text, and some of the trainees were coming in and being able to type as quickly, maybe not as accurately, but as quickly as some of the secretaries. So it's like, okay, well, why do we teach them how to dictate? Why do we do that when the new generation, even 10 years ago, are coming through with a better set of technology skills that requires then to think about, okay, well, are secretaries becoming more EAs? Are the EAs becoming more technically savvy? Can they contribute to other things? What does that look like? What's the sort of structure of a legal team sort of delivering a transaction?
Yeah.
partner through to sort of the business services and support people.
Well, it comes back to where you started when you asked me how did I get into this job. I mean, the secretarial role was changing so much. I mean, when I worked for Blethen, he was a really old school partner. He travelled a lot, so I did a lot of visa stuff, a lot of travel itineraries and that kind of thing, which is what I mostly taught the junior secretaries when they used to come on their like work experience fortnight. All they'd done at college was typing, and I'm like, nobody types anymore. This is not what you need to be learning to do. What you need to know how to do is, if a partner comes out of his office or her office and says to you, I need to go to China next Wednesday, what do you do about that?
Yeah.
How are they going to get to China logistically? Do they have a visa? Do they even have their passport? Do you have the passport details? Do you know how to get a visa? Like, these are the things that you're actually going to have to do rather than typing. So it was evident even then, pre-2013. And I mean, even, yeah, like you say, the graduates, when I was at college, 97 to 2001, I typed all of my essays. I didn't manuscript write anything. So even our generation, Ben, were coming out of college with better typing skills and able to type quicker. Maybe not you then. But yeah, I mean, that was then the evolution of my role as a PA, was that actually when Blethen retired and I was working for Philip Hertz, and he used to do a lot of his own typing, and he still travelled quite a bit, and he did a lot of business development. So there was events to organise, things like, dinner for 500 people at the Natural History Museum. And so again, it sort of evolved into more of an event management PA role. And then there was this sort of fast succession of new bits of tech coming out. And particularly, I think, when Matthew took over as managing partner, and there was a lot of change, and they needed somebody to be a super user, they used to call it. So, and Jenny used to nominate me, say, oh, Tess, you'll do that, won't you? And then I became the sort of super user expert in all of these different little bits of system for HR or for business development, whether it was interaction or the, PeopleSoft or whatever it was. And then this sort of legal tech stuff started coming along, and I used a few high data rooms, and then I was talking to Mark Ford about what his team did, and he needed somebody else to join the team, and it just seemed like an obvious transition. And I think actually the project and people management skills that secretaries have are really well set to move into these kind of roles. You don't need to be a developer. You do need to have good tech skills, and you need to be able to learn quickly the language that the developers speak in, so you can liaise and work with your IT colleagues. But it's actually a lot of it is about people management and stakeholder management and project management. So it's organisation skills, communication skills, actually more than the tech side, because you're driving it. You're not doing it. You're not delivering the matter. You're driving other people being able to do it with the technology. So you've got to spot opportunities in the piece of technology and how you could use that for a different use case.
Yeah. No, I mean I think that's a really, really good way to wrap up, to be honest with you, because if you look at everything, everyone's focused on the tech at the moment, but actually it's the humans that sit behind the tech that are making all of the difference. And I think it's how people adapt, how people can sort of evolve. The careers, I was chatting to my 16-year-old, and we were talking about the careers that I talked about when I was 16, just doing my GCSEs, and I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up. But ultimately, the skills that he's coming into and the workplace that he's coming into in 2, 3, 4 years' time, whatever that might be, is a very different world. And it will be a different world from where it is today. And I think that's that kind of idea that your sort of the softer skills, the people skills, the communication skills, the understanding of when to shut up, when to listen, what to do, all of those things come into play in terms of that rounded education and understanding, and the evolution of roles that exist today into the roles of the future. I was chatting to somebody on the podcast last week, and we were talking about how people in teams are going to need to learn the new bits of technology. And again, the same sort of point came through, which was actually, technology, but that's a commodity. The people that you're teaching that technology to have a deep understanding of your law firm and a deep understanding of their processes and their culture. And that is equally, if not more so, valuable than the piece of technology that you might be thinking about putting in or doing.
Yeah, and the tech's changing all the time, but what doesn't change is the skill set of the people using the tech.
Yeah.
They can adapt and they can pivot to using a new piece, but their core knowledge in how to run a project, or how to roll things out, or how to interact with the lawyers, or how to sense when it's time for change and when it's not time for change. These are human abilities. These are human skills.
Yeah.
And you can't put that into generative AI. Like you can, and it's all about human plus. It's leveraging technology to take us into a more efficient way of delivering things, or maybe reduce some risk, or add some quality, do it quicker, do it cheaper. But you have to have the right people. And I think the more and more technology is involved, the more that the skill set of the support teams is even more valuable and needed. Because if you want to ensure that lawyers are lawyering, then someone else needs to be supporting those pieces and making sure that they are working and interrogating the quality of what's coming out of these things.
In any other business, they're foundational aspects of your business: sales, marketing, support, infrastructure, whatever, product. They're key things. The thing that sits across the top of that is the lawyering, and you still need those foundational aspects to be spot on. And I think that's the evolutionary change we've seen in the last 15, 20 years. Tess, thank you very much for your time today. It's been wonderful chatting. No doubt I'll catch you in the next project update. But thank you very much. Greatly appreciated. And I will see you soon.
No problem. Thank you.
Catch you later.